Hello, this is my tutorial on the Market Tote by Cozy Nest Designs. This is an ingenious way of making a bag using seatbelt webbing. I found it quite hard to get hold of seatbelt webbing in the UK. I finally managed to buy some from AliExpress, which will take a while to come. But Sarah on Cozy Nest Designs sells it on her website. So if you have a look, you can actually get kits made up, and she'll send you the actual right amount that you need. You just pick the colours that you want. So have a look on the website because they're really well priced as well. So it's got slip pockets at the front on the exterior, which are very cleverly hidden. The tassel itself is made from seatbelt webbing, which I think is really effective. And it's not as straightforward as you think. I thought it would just be a case of laying down these strips, stitching them to fabric, and that's it. But no, it's not. It's quite clever. So stay watching and find out how to make this bag. And I hope we'll see some of your bags made. Enjoy the tutorial. Okay, to begin with, I just wanted to go over a couple of things that I'm using. First of all is the thread that I'm top stitching with. And this is Madeira Monofill 60 weight. There's different weights that they do. Sarah of Cozy Nest Designs recommends this one in particular. And she's the expert when this comes to these seatbelt bags. So I listened to her and bought two 1000 metre rolls. So I've test stitched it and my machine is okay with it. In the bottom, in the bobbin thread, I'm using gun-old poly thread to match the colour of the lining that I'm using. So I've already put this on my top, so that's that. Needle wise, I'm using a size 90 needle. I thought there was a couple of things to use a 70 needle, size 70, because it's nice and thin and it will slice through the webbing nice and smoothly. And then I thought about layers. Once we get to some layers, this is really thick and quite tough. And I just thought we could run into trouble with needle breaks. So I decided to go with a size 90 needle because it is thicker and stronger. As far as things like pinning, if we put pins into our webbing, we run the risk of it fraying. So I'm not using pins, and I'm a bit hesitant with clover clips even. Now you can buy the magnetic clips from, I think, So Easy. You see them, they're green, and they're very expensive, really expensive. They are here in the UK anyway. And I just use magnetic badges. They're really strong, the magnets on them, really strong. And for 12, I think I paid £10 on Amazon. So that was a lot cheaper than those clasps. So yeah, have a look at magnetic badges. I've got my hardware. Now, I got 2 packs from Sarah. She very kindly sent me them as gifts, which it was very sweet of her to do that. So I've got the ring, which is huge. I would have used a much smaller ring, so I'm glad she sent this to me so I know what to look for. The tassel, I love this tassel cap or holder. I've never seen this before and it's just absolutely fascinating. So I shall be on the hunt for these. And a zip end, and then I've got my bag label. I'm not adding a handmade label because I just know that by cutting through in the webbing to put the label in will destroy the webbing. It will just send it off fraying like crazy, and I'm not willing to risk it. So you may want to, but I'm not, so I'm leaving off the handmade label. It's not essential. So that's it on the hardware front, etc. As I said, I've got the three colours I'm using are Almost Black, Coral, and Whisper Silver, or Silver Whisper. So that's the bottom colour, middle and top. And then I've got all my lining and background fabric cut out. I've interfaced what needs interfacing. On the page, there's the apply the interfacing and transfer markings section, which is the first page after all the cutting instructions. It tells you there where to lay your interfacing and what margins to give on your fabric. So do read that. I don't give out measurements online because I feel it's like giving out the pattern. So do make sure you read the margins that you need to give because it can be quite relevant. So now we are going to prepare the back. Now you're going to have to bear with me. I've not made a seatbelt bag yet, confessions. And the webbing's been very hard for me to get, but I think I found a supplier on AliExpress now. So I'm new to this, as new as you are probably. So I just wanted to help you make yours. So bear with me if you have some pauses, because it's just that I'm glancing over at the pattern to see what to do next. So what we do need is the background fabric. And we need to measure 9.5 inches in from the left edge, like so, and 4.5 inches down from the top edge. And then we lay a slip pocket piece, like so. And I'm just going to pin it. In fact, I'm not going to pin it. I'm going to quickly. These badges are so strong, it's hard to get them apart. Just to hold the pocket in place, I'm just adding there. And then we just stitch along the top and the bottom using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And by the way, that is, the pieces are right side up. Okay, so I've basted the top and bottom edges. And now we need to mark some lines. I was searching for my pen then. So we need to mark lines 1/2 inch in from each edge. So it's very hard to do. I'm trying to do it in shot, but it's such a big piece of fabric. And then we also want to draw a line 5 inches down from the top edge. And then the last one is 16 inches in from the left edge. We need to do a line down. So, obviously I'm using a heat dissolvable pen, so, but I'm not sure it's going to matter too much. I've got a feeling we'll be hiding it all. So, just pop that aside for the moment. Now we want to bring a slip pocket piece and the slip pocket base and put them right sides together, aligning all the edges, and stitch along the top using 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so we've stitched along the top and we need to open this up. I always like to press the seam flat before folding over and ironing it again. Got some threads coming through, annoyingly. Okay, and then iron along the seam. And then we need to fold this in half to find the centre and mark the centre with a pin, like so. And before we proceed any further, we need to go through with marking numbers 1 to 7, I think it is. Yeah, 1 to 7 of the seat belts, the webbing. So for example, because I'm doing it in blocks and not stripes, I'm going to put a number 1 and a number 2. And by the way, I've done these coloured because I printed the large, medium and small size bags, and I've colour coded them so that I know the measurements, etc. So number 1, number 2, and then these are in the middle, 3, 4, 5. Now obviously if you're 6 and 7, if you're doing stripes and not colour blocks, then do that. So if by numbering them you can keep track of what you have to do and what piece you need next, and you don't have to worry about getting the colour right. So you need seatbelt, I'm calling it seatbelt, I should say webbing, so I do apologise, but it's seatbelt webbing. You need the number 3, and we need to align the centre, put the sticker on for the colour, the centre of each item. And I'm just going to mark the centre of the seatbelt one. Okay, so on the back of the seatbelt, I want to put the slip pocket on the back 1/8 of an inch down from the top edge. Okay, and lining up the centre marks. So and then we can turn it over, and we just need to stitch along the top edge of the slip pocket. So I stitched along the top so that the the thread was on the top, and removed the magnetic clips. And thankfully you can see I've just caught the edge in nicely. And then we turn it over, and we want to stitch along the bottom edge excuse me, as well. Okay, and now we want strip number 4, and we've got to match up the outer edges and we just need to stitch, make sure it's butting right up against the top one, and stitch at the top and along the bottom. Okay, so I added strip 4 and stitched the top and the bottom, and then I went ahead and stitched number 5, but only the top. You don't stitch the bottom, so just stitch along the top. And once we've done that, we need to get our back piece, and we need to fold this in half to get the centre point, and just pop a pin into the top to give us the centre point, and then we line it up matching with this line and this line. Earlier on I said I didn't want to use pins because I was worried that the pins would put holes and cause the seatbelt fabric to fray. Well, I double checked it and I tested it on some spare that I had, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't put any holes in it, so it's absolutely fine to go ahead and pin. So this is what we need to do now. So I've lined it up, and now we need to pin the upper edge like so. I could use my magnetic clasp, but I'm a bit concerned that they might, because we have to put so many in, there might be too many and they might slip, so I decided to go with the pins. And we just want to pin the outer edges like so. What we need to do now is transfer the centre line from the background onto the seat belt. Looking for my rulers. And now we just want to stitch down there, and we just need to also base stitch the bottom part of the strip that extends past strip 5 of the background. Okay, so I've stitched down there, and now what we want to do is mark 10 inches in from each end, like so, and do the same down the other end. And then we just need to stitch from this end up to the line at the top and the bottom of just the first one, and we do that both ends. So we've done that one, and now the final one we do is number 5, and we only do the top. Like we did this, we only do the top. Okay, now we stitch all the way along the bottom and stitch the ends at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so that's that. Now I've noticed that I've got slightly more at this end. I'm in line with the margin on this end, but I've got an excess. I don't know why. Perhaps it's because of the measurement that we had to do to the 16 inches. I'm not sure, but I'm not concerned. I'd be concerned if I didn't have enough fabric, but having a slight excess is not an issue. So if you've got an excess as well, don't worry. I just wanted to point that out. Now, if you have a free arm machine, which means you've got a longer top, so you've got a nice space underneath, you can do the next step of making this into a tube before you add the other strips. However, I don't, so I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to skip to section 22 and add the remaining strips. So I'm going to get number 2 and add number 2 above number 3, like so. And I'm going to stitch top and bottom, and then I'm going to add number 1 on top of that and stitch top and bottom, and I'll come back when I've done that. Okay, and now we add strips 6 and 7, the last 2 strips. Obviously, if you've done single lines, then that's fine as well, whichever way. So, top stitch and bottom stitch each one. Okay, so everything's stitched, and at the end, remember I said that it was there was an excess. Just trim, if you've got an excess, just trim so that you've got 1/4 inch seam allowance at each end, and make sure that the seat belts are flat, in line with each other. If they're not, just trim them a little bit to be in line. And what we need to do now is stitch both panels together at 1/2 inch seam allowance down there. I'm just putting this in now because I went ahead and I completely missed the part that you have to trim this to 1/2 inch seam allowance. So before you stitch this together at the seam, just trim so that you've got 1/2 inch seam allowance on the top and the bottom. I'm going to do that now. It's no disaster. Okay, the best thing to do is to use a zipper foot to stitch down the side here, because the seat belts together are quite high. And I also made sure that I matched the lines up of the seatbelt webbing. I'll show you what I mean, because we have to turn it right side out. And I matched up the lines there. Although we're going to have a panel there, a strip there, you do want it to look like they are equal. Now I stitched as closely as I could get, and when I open it up there's still that gap, and I don't think it's avoidable. They don't really come that much more together anyway, but that was getting as close as I could. So don't worry if you've got a gap like I have, because we're going to cover it over with the flap strip. So we just put this bag aside. I need to iron these markings out in a bit, so I will do that eventually. And we get the flap strip, and using a white pen for marking, we need to measure 1 3/4 inches down from one edge. I'll do this end actually. 1 3/4. Like so. And then at the line we want to fold the long edges inwards. So here we're pinching, and we want to go inwards like so, and we just need to take it to the machine and stitch across that line. So what I want to do, if we fold that in first and then mark the line on this side and do the same again and mark the line. In fact, it's probably even easier to do this. So we've marked on both sides, so that then, 5 panels, so we want to go to halfway on the middle panel. And now we've got the line marked there that we can just take it to the machine and stitch straight across. Okay, so I've stitched that down on each side. I'll snip the excess thread. And now we need to get the flap end piece, and we lay the flap end piece right side up, and we center the folded flap end like so, and then we fold back the edges like so, and we just stitch using 1/4 inch seam allowance straight across there. Okay, so we've stitched across, and then we pull this up like so, get our iron and just pull these edges in like so and press, and just turn the top edge over by about 1/4 inch. Fold in again, like so. I'm going to actually use some double-sided tape to keep that down. Just makes life a bit easier. Like so. And I'm going to trim these edges of the fluffy bits. And I just want to hold this in nicely as well, just to give me a nice neat finish. This isn't in the pattern, but I'm doing this because I don't want raw edges. So we've got again, as I said, you don't have to do this. This isn't part of the pattern. I'm doing it to give me a nice clean look. I'm sorry if you can hear all those dogs barking in the background. We have very noisy neighbours that have 3 very noisy dogs. And they bark and bark. Okay, so now we put our big ring through and we fold this over like so, so that on the other side you can just see there's still a little, you know, a little bit of the angle, and that's as far as you go. And what we need to do is stitch down the sides. I'm going to stitch, you don't have to stitch across, but I'm going to stitch across and back up to fix this in place. Okay, so here it is stitched, and I used invisible thread and the top thread and the bobbin, and then we just pop that aside, and now we get our bag body, and we need to center this. So lay it in the where you think is the center, and I used the markings that I had previously on the bag, and I line them up with the seam of the back, and then I measured from the center, which is the stitching we did in the center, to the outer edge, and they were the same width. And I turned it over and I measured from there to there, there to there, and they were the same. So I'm happy that everything is where it should be. And what we need to do now is just mark a notch in the center here, and on this side as well. And then we also need to do a notch here on each edge. In fact, I think I'll find it easier to do that. And then also we need to, I'm just looking for my white pen, mark lines along the edge here. Like so. So yeah, so I'm happy that we've put notches in everywhere that we should. And now what we need to do is at the top, we need to measure 3 inches from each of the center points. This is obviously for the medium. It'll be different measurements for the other size bag, so do check the tutorial. But for this one, I'm marking like so. And that's for the location of the handles. Now we turn over and we get our flap strip, and we need to have it so that 3.5 inches, check your tutorial for the size of the bag you're doing, extends past the upper edge. So we want I'm doing a line there, so that would be it. And it just goes below. So we want it from there, and it just goes, it's from the top edge of the bag, not the seat belts, and then it just pokes over the edge of this. So we need to put it in place, and we want to make sure it's centered over here. So I'm going to get some double-sided tape and place it down each side. Trying to get this tape off the edge. Oh. So, and I'm basically eyeballing the centre, just making sure that I line up at there. Now what you could do, in fact, what you could do is, if you measure, it's unfair for you to have to do this otherwise. So my seatbelt, measure the width of your seatbelt webbing. Mine is 1.78 of an inch wide. So I want mine to be 7.58 of an inch either side of the seam. So using those marks, I'm lining up. I'm happy with that. Those will iron away. So I've used my double-sided tape to press that down. Now we measure 1 inch down from the seatbelt top. so, and we go to our machine and we stitch down each side from the start of that line that we've just drawn to the end, both sides. You may find it easier to stitch inside out. Obviously you've got to stitch it with in the tunnel. So what we do is turn it inside out, and this really is the best way to do it, because you are going to be stitching in a tunnel. Because I stuck it down with double-sided tape, it's still in situ, and we start stitching down, and that you should, because it's quite big, be able to go all the way to the bottom, and then do the other side as well. So there should be room. If there isn't, then stitch as far as you can and then turn it round and stitch in that way. So I'm going to stitch down both sides. So that's it, sewn each side, and I turned it right side out again, and what you need to just do now is trim any overhang that you have of the seat belt. And be careful with it, obviously you don't cut the fabric underneath. Oh, that's wispy. And obviously we need to fuse the end again. Like so. Yeah, that's all crispy. And I ironed the sides here to get rid of the marks that I put there. Also making sure this was still central, I just put marks for the handles on the other side as well, which I forgot to do. So we've got marks on both sides. And what we need to do now is pop that aside and get the handles. And we just need to measure, check your pattern, because I'm not sure if, in fact I've got them here, so let's double check on the patterns if there's a difference in measurement, so that we know once and for all. No, they're all the same measurements for the bag, so don't worry about that, so that's good. So you need to mark 2.5 inches down from each end. And then the final end, okay, and now what we need to do, clear that up, is fold the seatbelt webbing together so the edges meet. And what we need to do is sew from the line we've marked all the way down to the line on this end, and then back up on the folded side, which would then give you the flat handle. Only between the lines though, don't stitch past the lines, and do both handles. So I stitched the handles, and what I did was when I went across I stitched 3 times just to really reinforce that stitching so that it doesn't pop undone. And then what we want to do is get the folded side down. I've put some double-sided tape at the top, and I've marked 3 inches from the centre on each side, and we just place the handle next to the mark. I'm going to turn it upside down so I can see where I'm putting it. So that's the folded edge down, and we're laying it at the top. You'll have cut the top and bottom, as I said before, with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we're just going to stitch across at 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'll add the other strap as well. Okay, so we've attached the handles both sides, and now we turn the bag wrong side out. And we need to locate the sides of the bag, and that is to find the notches that we made earlier and to line up everything in place. And just pull the handles up, and I've got the centre stitch line there, so I'm just going to make sure I always measure to make sure that we're at the same width. So just 7 1/4 inches that side, 7 1/2 that side. So we just need to shift a tiny bit. That's it, so the handles are matching, and this is why I measure. So now it's 7 3/8, 7 3/8. So I'm very happy with where that's situated. Now I want to I'm just wondering what the best thing to do would be to use the cable clips, I think, just to grip hold of the sides so that that doesn't shift, and just place and I am going to turn over and check this seam again, checking. My mum would just say measure twice, cut once. Well, I measure and then cut. So that's the centre seam. So it's 7 3/8. Yeah, okay, so I'm very happy that I've definitely got the bag lined up, the handles are lined up. So now we stitch across the bottom here at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So we will just be taking the edge of the webbing in. Okay, so I've sewn across, and just check inside to make sure you have caught this seat belt all the way across and you haven't got the exterior fabric poking through. And you can also check here along there. So you should have just caught it in, literally by 1/8 of an inch. I've got used to checking my camera every couple of shots, and I checked when I did this step and it didn't record for some reason, so not the end of the world. Once we'd stitched across the bottom, we then have to box the corners off. So what I did was I placed it on my board here and had the tip at the edge, and then using these rulers, these lines as a guide as well, I measured 1 7/8 of an inch in from the tip, drew a line across and stitched it. Then after that I did a reinforcement line on this side, not that side but this side, so it doesn't matter. I just like to do sort of 2 rows of stitching. Oh, wrong way. And I did both ends, and normally would then cut off this corner, but Sarah recommends not doing so because it could start the seat belt to unravel, and although it would be okay initially, over time it would continue to unravel and eventually it would just be lost. So leave the corner on. You're not going to see it, it's going to be inside the lining, so it's not the end of the world. And before you do that, obviously make sure that the line you did is lined up with the seam. So I don't know if you can see there or not, put it under the light a little bit. I can't see if it's going to come out on camera. I'm trying to get it so that you can see what I mean. Yeah, I really can't see it. I'm sorry if you can't see that, but that's how I did it. So I'm going to leave this wrong side out. I'm not sure yet when we come to the closing or adding the lining whether we do the right side out or not. So I'm just going to leave it like that and see what happens. Next we're going on to the lining. So I shall be back in a moment with the zipper pocket. Okay, onto the lining zipper pocket. What we need to do is get our lining piece and have the long edge along the top, so the shorter edges are down the side. And then I got my pattern zipper pocket piece and I cut the rectangle out of the pattern, laid it on, drew the rectangle and cut the notches either side. And then you use the notches to line up at the top of the lining piece and place them equally apart. Should be about 2 inches each side. And all we have to do then is slip some pins in place just to hold this in place, and then take it to the machine. And the pattern says, and most designers will say, stitch all the way around the rectangle. I don't. I just stitch along the bottom and the top line. I don't stitch the sides. And that's because sometimes it can look a bit messy. It doesn't quite turn perfectly because you haven't been able to stitch exactly right. There's all sorts of reasons that can cause it. But you'll see that by not stitching down the sides, you'll get a neater finish. And then it will be stitched in place when we stitch each side. So we're just going to stitch along the top and the bottom lines. I've stitched the top and the bottom, leaving the sides open, and I will add that I made the gap wider because I don't have a colour zip that I can use to match this lining apart from a number 5. And if I stitched the 3/8 of an inch gap with a number 5 zip, it would be very tight for opening and closing. So I just made it a bit wider at 1/2 inch. Now I'm going to cut along the centre. If you want to draw a line, if you're not confident just to cut, then by all means do. But I go about 1/2 inch away. Now you can draw a triangle from this point if you want to. I'll show you. So that gives you your guide for cutting. You can do it at both ends. And then go to the corner, but don't cut into that stitching, but go as far as you sort of dare to, really. The further the better, because it gives a crisper opening. Like so. Same with this end. And then I get my ironing pad, and now what we want to do is turn or pull the lining through to the other side. Like so. And then what I like to do is I just like to sort of flatten down the seam, and then I like to just slightly, I hope you can see this, but slightly have it so that the seam's on the inside, so that you don't see the seam looking at the front. Again, it just gives for a nicer finish. I'll lift it up to show you. You see how the seam's just slightly in. And then again, the same on this side. I just finger pressing the seam flat. Otherwise it tends to roll in on itself. And then again, curling it so that the seam is slightly on the inside. And now for the ends. We just press, and it just gives a neater corner. Again, pulling the lining through. Like so. so that then we've got a much neater hole to begin with. Okay, so we've prepared our hole, our opening, and I'm just going to get some Wonder Web, double-sided Wonder Web, and this is 6mm wide. If you don't have this, you could add some glue afterwards. It's not imperative. If you haven't got anything you can use, the zip pocket zip will sit, and it's hard to explain, but it won't be flush to the fabric. It might irritate you in the pocket. I'm just wondering if I've got an example somewhere. This is how it will sit, and this was glued down, or you can use Wonder Web. Otherwise you can just leave it loose and it won't be the end of the world, but it might be a bit irritating for you. And I'm just going to remove this now. You'll see why. Because I've got double-sided tape as well to battle with. So the first thing I do is put the zip underneath, and then I've got double-sided tape on the back here, and I'm just going to lay this centrally over the zip, like so. I probably didn't need to use double-sided tape and Wonder Web, but I wasn't really thinking. This isn't a usual method that I do, I must admit. I do my pockets very differently normally, so I'm not well practiced at this method, should I say. That's it. So now I'm going to stitch all the way around the box, and that's where we're going to stitch the sides as well. Okay, so that's the zip sewn all the way around the edge. Just turning my iron on, and this is where we now fuse that Wonder Web down. It's partially stuck anyway, but by fusing it, it will bond it completely. At the moment it's just sort of like double-sided tape stuck down. So this is now fusing it. So that's nice and tight to the fabric now. So that's sorted out. And then we just need to bring the pocket down to meet the other side, and I'm just going to give that a nice crisp edge there. And we just need to stitch the pocket down the side, along the bottom and up, and that will be the pocket completed. So that's the pocket stitched all the way around, and it's a lovely big pocket, really big, so nice for all your items to sit into. And I'm just going to get one of my labels and attach that. I'm sure if you add labels, you know how to do it, so I don't need to show you. And then we'll come back to complete the linings. Okay, so I've got my opposite lining piece. I added my bag here, my label here, sorry. So I've got my lining piece, and so I placed them right sides together, and I'm going to stitch from the top down and along, stop, leave an 8-inch gap, a good gap. You need a really good gap to turn this bag because it's quite stiff. So make sure it's 8 inches. Continue, obviously double stitching it to start and end, the end and the start, should I say, and then carry on up to the top. All of this is done with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, so I've stitched round the edge and just leaving that much of an opening, which I didn't actually measure, I just guessed it, but that is 8.5 inches, so I'm happy with that. And what we want to do now is just to open up the seams, which will help with doing the next part. And I like to iron all the way across because that helps with closing the bag, because we've already done the seam as such. And then I also want to open it up on the other side. I don't think I've quite got this in the camera shot, so I do apologise if I haven't. I've been so busy doing this I didn't think to check, so I'm sorry if you haven't had the, but you know how it looks to iron. So I've gone all the way around. This fabric is absolutely dreadful at fraying. I should have overlocked it. Had I realised how bad it was, I would have overlocked it before I used it, but hey ho, we learn. And so now we need to box the corners off. Turn my iron off. And this is why we've pressed the seams open, so it makes it nice and easy to match them up. And we want to match them on the inside because it looks awful if they're not lined up perfectly. So you want it to look like that. And if you're a bit dubious about doing this, what you could do is just do basting stitches, large basting stitches, so that you can unpick if you need to. Now I've got where I want this seam to sit, so I'll pin it to keep it in place. Like so. And now we want to measure um, 1 7/8 of an inch, like we did with the exterior. So if I do this with my board, then that will help me get a straight line, hopefully. So using this point here and my line on the ruler, typical that I put the pins just almost where I needed to mark. And I'm doing this, and then I'm also going to so I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a basting stitch so I can show you exactly what I mean. Okay, you can't actually really see it at the moment, but excuse me if you can hear my phone in the background. It's WhatsApp. I've done really long basting stitches, and what I'm going to do now is have a peek inside. I can peek from the bottom and check that I'm happy with the seam. So once I know I'm happy, I can go back to the machine and I can do a shorter stitch over the basting stitches. If I wasn't happy, I would simply unpick that very easily and redo it. So I'm going to do both corners, and she'll be back shortly. Okay, so I've stitched across both corners, and I have checked the seams that I'm happy with down where they are, and then we just cut across a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Like so. And then we put that aside for the moment, and we grab our bag again, wrong side out still, and I'm going to just pop the handles inside. And I'm going to just pin them in place so they don't shift. So I've added 2 pins to each handle, like so. And then the flap strip, we want to pin that down out of the way so that it doesn't shift up and get in the way. So I'm just going to pin that to itself further down. Okay, so it's pinned in there. I don't know if you can see or not. We grab the lining again, and we just want to mark some notches in the centre of the lining. So I'm going to get my ruler. That was right first time. And so 7 3/8 is the centre, and again on the other side. So just mark the middle. I'm measuring from seam to seam. Like so. And we need to put it right side out. And we want to put this into the exterior, making sure that the pocket side is not on the side of the pockets that are on the front. So the pocket side of the lining goes to the back of the bag. then getting the markings that we've just made, line them up with the markings or the seam on the exterior. Just hold that seam open with pins, and then do the same on the other side. I've got the mark that I made earlier as well, or you may have cut notches, whichever you did. And then I thought I'd marked the side, but I haven't. But it's not a problem, because what we want to do is go around and pin the lining and the exterior together. And now we take this to the machine and stitch 1/2 inch seam allowance around the top edge. So this should mean that we should stitch right next to the seat belt, but not actually on it. And back stitch on the handles as well, just to reinforce them. Okay, so I stitched around the top, and I've turned the bag to right side out. Check that I'm happy with all the stitching. So now I'm going to close the seam, and I like to help myself by adding some double-sided tape. And my seam did actually open up all the way to the joint, so it's not the end of the world. It's just as I did it, so it just tore, the stitching tore. So that's the thing with the 60 weight thread, it's not as strong as the 40 weight poly thread that I use. And it's strong enough, but I obviously didn't back stitch enough. But that's okay, it will be fine. If I was that bothered, I could turn it back inside out and stitch it closed again. So I'm going to add it so that the layers are even, the seam's even. And I'm going to take it to the machine, and I'm going to stitch this closed. So I've stitched this closed, and I'm going to push this inside the bag. And turn my iron on. And I'm going to press the lining flat all the way around the edge to get it to sit nicely, and leave the handles up, because if you fold them down they want to stick up in here. So we need to just have the handles so that they're sat like this while we sew and iron. And also we're going to be stitching this to the bag, which is a bit of a relief, because when I first read the pattern I thought, oh, we're going to leave that open and that won't look very nice, but no, it's taken care of. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is to stitch each side here. So we'll stitch the sides and then I will top stitch all the way round. Okay, before we do the gusset pieces, just want to prepare our zip. So I've got a zip here that actually measures 14 inches and I've marked a line 1/2 inch down, and what we need to do is fold it on that line and then bring the zip from the back to the top of it, to the top of the fold, so that it's like that. So I get my glue. You can use a pin, you can stitch it, whatever you like to do. Fold it, bring the teeth round, and then I put some glue in that part and in that part. Doesn't need much. And then we get a clip to hold it. And then the same on this side. Bend at the line, bring the teeth up and round. Dab of glue in there and in there. So just put that aside to dry, it won't take long. And then we get our gusset strips and our gusset end pieces, the sizes given to you in the pattern. And then we want to get one of the gusset end pieces and centre this like so, and there should be about 3/4 of an inch on each side visible. So if I do that, yeah. And then we want to wrap them round. So we've got the gusset strips right side up, and the webbing is also right side up. So they both are. And then we're going to go and stitch along at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so now you've got it like this, and you want to pull it up so that you can see the right side of the fabric, like so. I get my ironing pad and press on both sides, and then we need to fold this down to the top edge of the webbing and then fold it down again so it's like that, and then we just need to stitch all the way across. Okay, so there's the first one made, and now I'm going to do the other ends, all three that are left, and do exactly the same with all of them. Okay, so the zip's dried now, and I've done all 4 ends, and I've got this piece of fabric here that's 2 inches by 2 inches, and I folded over each edge by 1/4 inch and pressed them, and then folded it in half wrong sides together. And this is your zip tab, and you add it to the end of the zip, and you can stitch all the way around to fix it in place. However, I like to add a metal zip end. So I've got an oval one here, and I always add a little bit of glue. Not too much, because you don't want it oozing out of the top. And then we fold the zip over the back and over again. And then I push the zip down inside as far as it will go, and then pop a screw in. Oh, they're so tiny and fiddly. Just like to make sure it's sat flush in and not sitting proud. So there we have the zip end attached. So what we need to do now is get our zip. As you'll see, it's slightly longer than the gusset, which is what we want it to be. And then I'm going to use some double-sided tape to fix the zip in place. And we lay the gusset piece not too close to the zipper teeth, otherwise you won't be able to slide the zip pull. So like that, and then just test before you do anything that you can slide it, which you can, and take it to the machine and stitch fairly close to the edge so that you make sure you get the zip in place. And what you can do is also do 2 rows of stitching so that you can catch the edge of the zip in also. So I'm actually going to do 2 rows of stitching. Okay, so here's the one side attached. The zip moves freely up and down, and I did 2 rows of stitching. I did it close to the edge there, and then close to this edge. And I'm going to add the other side in exactly the same way and stitch that. Okay, so that's the zipper panel prepared, and now it's a very easy case, she says, of putting it inside the bag. Now I've marked the halfway point on here, and I've marked the halfway point on my bag, and it's just a case of clipping it along here. So we're going to stitch all the way across, and I'm going to stitch fairly close to the edge, about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So here she is made with the zip added in the top, and all that's left now to do is to make the tassel if you're making one. So I shall be back in a moment to add the tassel. Okay, I'm choosing black for my tassel because it will land over the coral colour. And what I've done is, I did use a lighter at this end, but I've also dabbed some glue on it to reinforce it. And what we need to do, I've got this lovely tassel cap from Cozy Nest Designs. Absolutely beautiful. I love the shape. And so you can get one from there. And we just cut the edge very carefully. And we only go up to about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. So like that we leave. And the same on this side. Because if you go right to the very top, the whole lot will unravel. Okay, and then some of it's going to come away initially, but after that, you just pull away. Okay, so that's the tassel done. And then, bearing in mind we've got to fit this in here, remove the screws. And because this is quite flat, we don't roll the tassel up like we would with the regular tassel caps. As you can see, it's sort of quite flat. So I think I'm going to fold into 3 and see how we get on. Okay. And there now. We have our tassel added. Absolutely lovely. I've really enjoyed making this bag. I hope you enjoy the tutorial. And if you do use this tutorial to make your bag, please do give the link to this tutorial when you post your bag in groups so that other people can find it as well. And I look forward to seeing your bags in Cozy Nest Designs group and my group, Bag Making Addicts.